This ring holds a secret, Mafia boss said as he slipped it onto the poor girl's finger. The smell of stale coffee and industrial grease was the perfume of Elena Russo's life. At 22, she felt closer to 50. The ache in her feet was a dull, constant thrum, a reminder of the double shift she was just pulling the pin on. It was her third double this week. Every hiss of the espresso machine, every clatter of heavy ceramic plates was just noise layered over the single, silent scream in her mind, the number. The figure on her mother's latest hospital invoice, a stack of digits that seemed to grow taller every time she looked at it. Cancer was a thief, and it was robbing them of everything. First, her mother's vitality, and now, Elena's future. This part of Crescent Bay was where the city tucked away its problems. The diner, the golden ladle, was a relic of a better time, its neon sign flickering like a dying pulse. Elena moved through the worn booths with an economy of motion, her dark ponytail lashing behind her. She was a ghost in this place, refilling cups for truckers and night shift workers, her face pale and drawn. All she wanted was to cash out, walk the 6 blocks to her tiny apartment, and fall into bed for the 5 hours she had before her next shift. The bell above the door chimed, a sharp, intrusive sound at this late hour. The diner went quiet, not just quieter, but silent. The clinking of cutlery stopped. The low murmur of the 2 cops in the corner booth died. Elena looked up from the register. 4 men. They did not belong. They wore darkness like a uniform, tailored black suits, crisp white shirts, no ties. They moved with a heavy, predatory grace that sucked the air out of the room. The cheap fluorescent lights seemed to dim, catching on expensive watches and the glint of heavy gold rings. 3 of the men fanned out, 1 by the door, 2 scanning the other patrons. The 2 cops stared determinedly into their coffee cups. The man in the lead, however, looked at no one but the empty booth in the far back. He was perhaps 34, tall, with a stillness that was more frightening than any open aggression. His black hair was cut short, severe. His face was all harsh angles and shadow, but it was his eyes that held the room hostage. They were dark, assessing, and utterly devoid of warmth. This was Damian Moretti. Elena knew the name. Everyone in Crescent Bay knew the name. It was whispered in fear, the invisible hand that controlled the docks, the unions, the entire underbelly of the city. He was the head of the Moretti Syndicate, a man who had inherited an empire and made it a fortress. He slid into the back booth, the vinyl groaning in protest. His men remained standing, sentinels of his power. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Her manager, Sal, had vanished into the kitchen. The other waitress was frozen by the coffee machine. Elena was the only one on the floor. She picked up a menu, her hand trembling so slightly she prayed it was invisible. She walked over, her shoes sticking to the floor. "Can I get you something?" Her voice was a dry rasp. Damian Moretti looked up at her. It felt like a physical weight. He studied her worn-out uniform, the smudge of mustard on her apron, the exhaustion etched around her eyes. He did not seem curious, so much as analytical. "Just wine," he said. His voice was low, a rumble of gravel. "Red, whatever bottle you have." "We just have the house red," Elena stammered. "It's a Cabernet." "Fine." She hurried to the bar, her hands fumbling with the corkscrew. She poured a glass, her pulse roaring in her ears. One of his men, a mountain of muscle with a scarred neck, stepped forward to take the tray from her. "I'll take it," he grunted. "No, Vince." Damian's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. "She will." Vince stepped back, his face darkening. Elena's stomach turned to ice. She picked up the tray. She understood. This was a test, or a game. She walked the few feet back to the booth, her focus entirely on the dark red liquid sloshing in the glass. She set it down, but as she pulled her hand back, the man named Vince shifted his weight, bumping the small table. The glass wobbled, tipped, and fell. Red wine exploded across the table, splashing onto the white shirt of the man beside Damian. Elena froze. The entire diner stopped breathing. The man who had been hit, a younger, leaner man with dead eyes, looked down at his ruined shirt, then up at Elena. His expression was one of pure, cold venom. "You stupid girl," he hissed, starting to rise. Elena flinched, bracing herself for the inevitable. A backhand, a shove, a scream. In this part of town, you learn to anticipate violence, to curl into yourself to protect what mattered. "Sit down, Antonio." Damien's voice was perfectly calm. He had not moved. He was watching Elena. His head tilted. He watched her flinch. He watched her eyes squeeze shut, her body prepare for an impact that didn't come. Antonio slowly, agonizingly sat back down. "It's just wine," Damien said, his gaze still locked on Elena. He picked up a napkin and idly pushed it toward the spill. "Bring another glass. And the bottle." Elena's eyes snapped open. She stared at him, bewildered. He was not angry. He was not shouting. He just watched her. His curiosity was a tangible thing, a spotlight pinning her to the floor. "Now," he added, softly. She nodded, mute, and fled to the bar. She returned, her body vibrating with adrenaline. She set the new glass down, her hand shaking violently this time. She poured, managing not to spill a drop, and left the bottle. "That's all?" she whispered. Damien Moretti finally broke eye contact. He looked into his glass. For now, she fled. She cashed out, her hands fumbling with the keys to the register. She didn't look at the back booth as she grabbed her thin jacket and her bag, pushing through the diner door into the cold night air. She just ran. The chiming of the bell chasing her out into the darkness. The 6-block walk had never felt longer. The adrenaline from the diner was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. She clutched the strap of her messenger bag, her thoughts already turning back to the hospital, the bills, the suffocating weight of it all. She cut through the alley behind a closed laundromat, a shortcut she always took. The single streetlight at the far end was broken, casting the narrow passage in deep shadow. She heard the footsteps behind her. It was not an echo of her own, it was heavier, and there were 2 of them. Elena's blood ran cold. She quickened her pace, her keys already in her hand, woven between her fingers like a pathetic weapon. They were faster. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind, thick and smelling of cloves and stale sweat. Another arm wrapped around her waist like a band of steel. Lifting her off her feet, she kicked, driving her heel back. But she hit nothing solid. "Got her!" a muffled voice grunted. "Be quick!" Panic, pure and primal, surged through her. This was not a robbery. They were taking her. They were dragging her toward the mouth of the alley. She bit down, hard, on the hand over her mouth. The man roared, yanking his hand back. "She bit me!" Elena screamed, a raw, desperate sound that was cut short as the other man slammed her back against the brick wall. The impact knocked the wind from her. Her head snapped back, stars exploding behind her eyes. "Stupid!" the first man growled, lunging for her. A blinding light flooded the alley, washing out the shadows, a high beam. It was accompanied by the roar of an engine, a sound so loud it vibrated in her chest. A massive, black SUV filled the entire mouth of the alley, blocking the only exit. It had come from nowhere. The 2 men froze, trapped in the glare. The SUV did not slow down. The man who had grabbed her first shoved his companion forward. "Deal with it," the second man, blinded, put a hand up, only to realize the vehicle was not stopping. He tried to dive aside, but it was too late. There was a sickening, heavy thud. The man was thrown against the wall like a rag doll before crumpling to the pavement. The first attacker, the one with the bleeding hand, stared in horror. He let go of Elena, who slid down the wall, gasping. He turned to run, to climb the chain-link fence at the side of the alley, but the passenger door of the SUV flew open. Damien Moretti stepped out. He moved with a speed that was terrifying. He did not run. He simply covered the ground. The attacker scrambled at the fence, and Damien grabbed him by the collar, yanking him back. The man swung a wild punch. Damien intercepted it, catching the man's wrist. There was a sharp, wet snap of bone. The man screamed. Damien hit him once, a short, brutal jab to the throat. The man collapsed, gagging. The alley fell silent again, save for the hum of the SUV's engine and the man's desperate choking. Damien Moretti stood over the 2 fallen figures. He looked at the one he'd hit with his car, then at the one on the ground. He nudged the second man with the toe of his expensive shoe. Cold, professional. Then he turned to Elena. She was slumped against the wall, chest heaving, tears of terror streaming down her face. She looked from him to the man on the ground, her mind unable to process what had just happened. He walked over to her, his face an impassive mask in the harsh glare of his own headlights. He reached out a hand. Elena flinched, hard, pressing herself against the brick. His hand stopped. He held it there, palm up, a few feet from her. "Get in the car," he said. His voice was not kind. It was an order. "What? Who?" she stammered. "They will be back. Or others will—" "You are not safe. Get in the car." She stared at his hand, then at his face. He was not the man from the diner. This was the man the city feared. He had just crippled 2 men in less than 10 seconds, and he was not even breathing hard. He was her savior, and he was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. She took his hand. It was rough, calloused, and surprisingly warm. He pulled her to her feet, his grip like iron. He did not release her, but half dragged, half led her to the SUV, opened the back door, and pushed her inside. "Vince," he said to the driver, "go." The high point? The SUV reversed out of the alley, its tires spinning on the gravel, and disappeared into the night. The drive was a blur. Elena was in shock, wrapped in a silence so thick it felt like cotton. Damien sat beside her in the back, but he was not looking at her. He was on the phone, his voice a low, angry monotone. 2 of them allied by the diner, no, amateurs, Carvalho's dogs, maybe, sloppy. Find out who they were, and find out why. He listened, his jaw tightening. "I don't care. She's involved now. Find out." He hung up. They drove through the city, leaving the rough neighborhoods behind, climbing the winding hills of Crescent Bay until they reached a high-rise building made of glass and steel. It was a fortress in the sky. Vince drove them into a private, subterranean garage. Damien led her to an elevator, which opened directly into a sprawling penthouse. It was sterile, cold, and massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire glittering, indifferent city below. It was not a home. It was a cage. "Where am I?" Elena's voice was a whisper. "A safe house," Damien replied, shrugging off his suit jacket. He tossed it onto a leather chair. "You'll stay here tonight." "Tonight? I have to go home. My mother, I have to—" "You can't," he said, turning to face her. The softness from the diner was gone. This was the boss. "Those men weren't trying to rob you. They were trying to take you. They will try again. Your apartment is the first place they'll look." Elena's breath hitched. "But why? They must have mistaken me for someone else. I'm nobody. I have nothing." Damien's eyes narrowed. "That's what we're going to find out." Vince and Antonio, the man from the diner with the stained shirt, entered the apartment. Antonio's eyes were still cold, but he avoided looking at Damien. "Your bag," Damien ordered Elena. She flinched, clutching the cheap canvas messenger bag to her chest. "Give it to me, Elena." The sound of her name on his lips was a shock. She hadn't told him her name. He had learned it. The realization that he had that kind of power, that he could pull her identity from the air, was deeply unsettling. She handed him the bag. He dumped its contents onto a glass coffee table. A worn-out wallet with $3, a pack of tissues, an employee ID for the diner, her apartment keys, and a half-eaten granola bar. Damien sifted through it. Then Antonio stepped forward with a small, black device. He waved it over the pile, and then over the bag itself. It beeped. A high, thin sound. Antonio ripped open the lining of her bag. Tucked deep into the cheap cotton batting was a small, black square, no bigger than a thumbnail. A tracker. Elena stared at it. "What is that? I don't know." "Someone planted this on you," Damien said. His voice was grim. "At the diner or before. But why?" Her voice broke. "They went to all that trouble? For a waitress?" Damien looked at Vince. "Mistaken identity?" Vince shook his massive head. "The tracker says no. They knew exactly who she was. They wanted her." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. The attack, the whine, the way he had watched her. It was all connected. This was not a mistake. She was a target. The fragile dam of control she maintained, the one that held back the fear of her mother's illness and the crushing weight of the bills, finally broke. It was not a graceful cry. It was a raw, tearing sob that ripped out of her chest. The adrenaline, the terror, and the absolute hopeless confusion of the last hour overwhelmed her. She sank to her knees on the cold marble floor, her body shaking apart. I don't understand. My mom, she's sick, she wept, the words tumbling out, incoherent. I just work. I don't know anything. I don't know anyone. Vince and Antonio looked away, uncomfortable. These were men who dealt in violence, not in broken 22-year-old girls. Damien watched her for a long moment. His face was unreadable. He made a sharp gesture with his head. Both of you, get out. Find out who planted it. The two men nodded and left the apartment, the door closing with a heavy, final click. Elena was alone with him. She cried, her hands covering her face, her shoulders hitching. She was so tired and so scared. She heard him move. She tensed, expecting him to grab her, to shake her, to demand answers she didn't have. Instead, something heavy and warm settled over her shoulders. She looked up. He had draped his suit jacket around her. It was heavy, made of fine wool, and it smelled faintly of spice and iron. He crouched in front of her, not too close, but not far. He did not touch her, other than the coat. Crying won't help, he said, but his voice was not harsh. It was just a fact. I don't know what else to do, she sobbed. You have to let me go. They'll hurt my mother. They won't, he said, with a certainty that was absolute. I've already moved her. Elena's head snapped up, her tears stopping. What? When I learned your name, I learned about your mother. She's not at the hospital anymore. She's at a private clinic. A better one. She is safe. They can't find her. She stared at him, her mind reeling. In the span of an hour, he had abducted her, saved her, and moved her dying mother. He had rearranged her entire life. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing this? Because, Damien said, his dark eyes searching her face. You were targeted, and that makes you my problem, or my possession. I haven't decided which. The bluntness of it, the cold ownership in his tone, should have terrified her, but she was too exhausted to be terrified. She just felt empty. She began to shake again, the coat slipping from her shoulders. He sighed, a quiet, impatient sound. He moved closer, and this time he did touch her. He put one hand on her back, between her shoulder blades, and the other on her shoulder. He didn't pull her into a hug. He just held her. He was a wall, a solid, unmoving presence in the middle of her collapsing world. She did not know when she fell asleep, only that the sobs had exhausted her into a numb void, and his hand on her back was the only solid thing in it. She woke to gray light. She was on the sofa, still wrapped in his jacket. The sun was rising over Crescent Bay, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and delicate gold. Damien was standing by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand. He had not slept. He was still in his shirt sleeves, his back to her, watching the city wake up. Elena sat up, her body aching. The jacket pooled in her lap. It's morning, she said, her voice rough. Yes, he said, not turning. You're safe. For now. She stood, her legs unsteady. What happens now? He turned. His face was tired, the hard angles softened by the dawn. He looked at her, and for a second she saw something flicker in his eyes, something other than calculation. He set his coffee down and walked to her. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. They won't stop, he said. They think you have something, or you know something. They will come for you, and they will use your mother to get to you. But I don't know anything, she pleaded. They don't believe that. He took her left hand. His grip was firm, his thumb pressing into her palm. She tried to pull away, but he held her fast. There is only one way to protect you, he said. Only one way to make you untouchable, to put you under my name, my protection. He slid a ring onto the fourth finger of her left hand. It was not a diamond. It was a heavy, intricate band of dark, almost black gold, holding a single, large black opal. The stone shimmered with an internal fire of deep blue and green. It was beautiful, and it was heavy. A shackle. Elena stared at it, her heart stopping. "This ring holds a secret," Damien whispered, his face close to hers. His thumb brushed the opal. "It belonged to my mother. Now, they can't touch you." The emotional tension in the room was suffocating. Elena looked from the ring, a silent, heavy promise, up to his face. His eyes were locked on hers, intense, demanding. This was not a proposal. It was a brand, a claim. She was overwhelmed, confused, and terrified. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to ask what he meant, but no words came. He did not speak either. They just stood there in the quiet dawn light, the city waking up below them, bound by a secret she did not understand and a ring that had just sealed her fate. The black opal on her finger felt as heavy as a gravestone. Elena stood frozen, the silence of the penthouse amplifying the frantic hammering of her heart. Damien watched her, his expression unreadable, letting the weight of his action settle onto her. Before she could find her voice, his phone buzzed on the glass table. He glanced at it, his focus shifting instantly from personal to professional. "Yes," he answered. He listened, his back straightening. "Send the press release. Use the photo from the consulate dinner last year, the one of me. Then, add a line. Mr. Moretti is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Elena Russo. Send it to every major outlet in this city, and then send a message to Carvalho. Tell him the girl is mine. Tell him if one of his men so much as looks at her shadow, I will burn his entire family to the ground." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Press release? Engagement?" He hung up the phone and looked at her. "It's done. You are now, in the eyes of the world and my enemies, my fiancé." The shock gave way to a sudden, white-hot fury. "You can't do this." Her voice was a low, shaking whisper that quickly rose to a scream. "You can't just decide my life. You put this thing on my finger and tell the world I belong to you. I am not your property. I am not your shield." She yanked at the ring. It wouldn't budge. It was perfectly, cruelly sized. "Take it off," she demanded, lunging at him, her small fists beating uselessly against his chest. It was like hitting a marble statue. He caught her wrists, his grip effortless, stopping her flurry. "Stop," he commanded. "No, you bastard. You think you can just claim me after you. You killed those men after you moved my mother. You are a monster." "I am the only reason you are alive," he said, his voice dropping, cutting through her hysteria. He did not have to. The cold finality in his tone was enough. "Do you have any idea what they would have done to you? They planted a tracker. They came for you. They were not going to ask you questions. Elena, they were going to take you apart, piece by piece, to find out what you know. I told you, I know nothing. And I told you they don't believe that. Now, they never will." He released her wrists, stepping back. "As of this morning, you are Elena Russo, the waitress who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, a loose end. But as of 5 minutes from now, you will be Elena Russo, the future Mrs. Moretti. You will be the one thing in this city that not a single person, not the Carvalhos, not the police, not God himself, will dare to touch, because you are mine." The arrogance of it, the absolute ownership choked her. "I would rather die." "No, you wouldn't," he said, his voice suddenly quiet, almost soft. "You wouldn't, because you have a mother to think about, a mother who is, right now, in the best private clinic in this state with a specialist I flew in from Baltimore. She's comfortable, and she is safe, and she will stay that way, as long as you stay safe." It was the most brutal, effective chain he could have forged. He hadn't just put a ring on her finger. He had shackled her to her own love. "That's blackmail," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving her hollow. "It's protection," he countered. "This is my world. These are the rules. You are in it now. This is the only way out." "This isn't a way out," she said, tears of rage and helplessness burning her eyes. "This is a cage. Cages keep things safe. He turned and walked to the kitchen, pouring himself another coffee, as if he had just finished a simple business negotiation. "Get some rest. Vince will bring you some clothes. You won't be leaving." "I will," she spat. "You can't keep me here." He sipped his coffee. "Try." She waited 2 hours. She waited until he had left the penthouse, leaving her with the silent, brooding presence of Vince, who stood by the elevator doors like a 250-pound gargoyle. She grabbed her purse, the one with the lining ripped out, and marched to the door. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight. Vince didn't even look at her. He just put one massive arm out, barring the way. "He can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "This is kidnapping. Mister, Moretti is saving your life. Miss," Vince rumbled, his voice like gravel in a tin can. "You should be grateful. Now, step away from the door." "And if I don't?" Vince turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were flat, dead. He didn't need to threaten her. The promise of violence was in his posture, in the calm way he regarded her as a simple obstacle. She backed away, defeated. She went to the great glass windows and stared down at the city. She was a prisoner, 20 stories in the air. Meanwhile, across town, in a cigar-choked back room that smelled of spilled whiskey and old fear, Ricardo Carvalho slammed a heavy glass tumbler down on his desk. He was a portly man, his face perpetually flushed with rage. "His fiancée," he roared at the 3 men standing before him. "You were sent to grab a nobody waitress, and she ends up engaged to Damian Moretti?" "Boss, we didn't know," one of the men stammered. "The tracker. It was just as we planned." But he showed up, Moretti himself, because he knew. Carvalho slammed his fist on the desk. He knew what she was. What was she? "Boss, she's a waitress." "We checked." Carvalho leaned forward, his small, dark eyes narrowing. "You don't know your history. 20 years ago, there was an accountant, a quiet little mouse named Alberto Russo. He worked for old man Moretti, Damian's father. He saw everything. He knew where everybody was buried, because he was the one moving the money that buried them." He picked up a framed photo from his desk. It was of a young woman with a hard smile. "Alberto was the one who held the proof of the betrayal that got my sister." "My sister. Killed," he whispered, his voice thick with old hatred. "He had the ledgers, proof that it wasn't our family who betrayed the Morettis, but someone in their own. He was supposed to give them to me. Then he vanished. A robbery gone wrong, and the ledgers vanished with him." "And the waitress?" "Elena Russo, Alberto's daughter, his only child," Carvalho sneered. "She was 2 years old. It's taken me this long to find her. He must have hidden it. Some key, some code, a location, and he must have passed it to her, without her even knowing it. Tucked in an old toy. Maybe, or a locket." He pointed a shaking finger at his men. "And now? Damian Moretti has her. He's put his mother's ring on her finger. That ring," Carvalho's face contorted. "That bitch's ring. He knows. He knows she's the key. Find her. I don't care if she's engaged to the devil himself. Get that girl, and get what her father stole from me." The days in the penthouse blurred into a strange, suffocating routine. Elena had clothes, delivered in expensive boxes from stores she had only ever walked past. She had food, anything she wanted, prepared by a silent housekeeper who came and went. She had a television with 1,000 channels, and she was utterly, completely alone. Damian was gone most of the time. He ran his empire. He would return late at night, a shadow of violence and exhaustion, and be gone before she woke. But she watched him. In the brief moments they shared the same space, she began to see the contradictions. One evening, he was in the living room, standing over Antonio. The man with the dead eyes was on his knees. Damian was holding a tablet, his voice dangerously low. "You were followed," Damian said. "From the docks. You led them to the warehouse on 7th. You were sloppy." "Boss, I swear I checked." "You were sloppy," Damian repeated, his voice a razor's edge. "That sloppiness cost me $5 million in product, and it cost 2 of my men their lives. I am sorry. It won't happen again." Damian crouched in front of him, the picture of calm. "No," he said. "It won't. He set the tablet down. And then he struck Antonio, a backhand so fast, so brutal, that the sound of it cracked through the silent room like a gunshot. Antonio crumpled, a dark line of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. "Get out of my sight," Damien whispered. "You are off the docks. You're on sanitation, until I say otherwise." Antonio scrambled to his feet, relief and terror warring on his face. He practically ran for the elevator, leaving a single drop of blood on the white marble. Elena watched from the hallway, her hand over her mouth, her body rigid with fear. Damien stood there for a moment, his chest rising and falling. He closed his eyes, rubbing the bridge of his nose. When he turned and saw her, he didn't startle. His eyes, which had been black with rage, softened, just a fraction. But she saw it. He walked past her, ignoring the blood on the floor, and went to the bar. He poured 2 glasses of water, not whiskey. He walked back to her and held one out. She stared at the glass, then at his hand, the same hand that had just struck his man. His knuckles were red. "You'll get used to it," he said, his voice flat. "I don't want to get used to it, no," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He failed," Damien said. "Failure in my world has consequences. He's lucky he's still breathing. You're a monster." He looked at her, his gaze heavy. "I am what I have to be. Drink the water, Elena, you're pale." He pushed the glass into her hand. His fingers brushed hers. They were warm. He was ruthless, violent, a king of a dark and bloody world. And yet, he had brought her water. He had covered her with his coat. He had saved her mother. This quiet, almost tender gesture, coming seconds after such brutality, was more confusing than the violence itself. Later that week, she found him by the window, long after midnight. He was just standing, staring at the lights, the black opal ring on his own hand, a signet, different from hers, catching the moonlight. Elena was twisting the ring on her finger. It had become a habit, a nervous tic. "You shouldn't do that," he said, without turning. "It feels wrong," she admitted, stopping. "It was my mother's." The admission hung in the air. She had not expected him to share anything. "She's the only person I've ever known who was good, purely good." He turned to face her, his expression unguarded, lost in a memory. She loved this ring. She said the stone held fire inside it. He looked down at the ring on Elena's hand. "The Carvalhos, the family that's hunting you. They were our allies. Once. My father's closest friends. Ricardo Carvalho was like an uncle to me." "What happened?" Elena asked, her voice soft. "Betrayal," he said, the word like acid. "Someone in our family sold us out to them. They staged an ambush. They were aiming for my father. But my mother was in the car. She died in his place. I was 10. I watched it happen." He looked at Elena, his eyes dark with a pain so old it had become a part of him. "The Carvalhos were responsible for her death. This ring is all I have left of her, and I put it on your finger. That's how important it is that you stay alive." A bridge was forming. It was fragile, built of shared secrets and circumstance, but it was there. She was no longer just his prisoner. She was the keeper of his mother's ring. The tension between them changed. It was no longer just predator and prey. It was something heavier, charged with unspoken potential. The breaking point came at a dinner. Damien was hosting 2 of his capos, older men with hard faces and expensive suits. Elena had been ordered to be there, to play the part. She sat at the end of the long, polished table, silent, picking at the food on her plate. Antonio, restored to favor, was serving the wine. As he leaned over to refill her glass, he spoke, his voice low, meant only for her. "You clean up nice," he sneered, his breath hot on her ear. For a diner girl, must be a nice change, wearing $1,000 dresses instead of an apron. Elena flinched, her body going rigid. "Careful you don't spill anything. Ragazza. The boss doesn't like messes." The capos were watching, their eyes amused. Damien was at the head of the table, deep in conversation, but his head tilted. He was listening. Elena's first instinct was to shrink, to look away, but the mention of the diner, the memory of her fear that night, and the weeks of being a silent, terrified pawn, it all coalesced into a cold, hard knot of anger. She turned her head and looked Antonio directly in the eye. Her voice did not shake. "I may have been a waitress," she said, her voice clear, carrying across the table. "But I earned my money. I worked for it. I didn't get it by kneeling on the floor and begging for forgiveness like a dog." The table went silent. The capo's smiles vanished. Antonio's face went white, then a deep, mottled red. His hand tightened on the bottle. "You," he began, raising his hand. "Antonio," Damien's voice was lethal. He hadn't moved. He was staring at Elena, but his word was for his man. Antonio froze. "Set the bottle down and leave the room," Damien ordered. Antonio, shaking with humiliation, slammed the bottle on the table and stormed out. The capos looked at Damien, then at Elena, with a new, calculating respect. Damien said nothing, simply picked up his own glass and continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. After they left, the apartment was deafeningly quiet. Elena was in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the sink, her body trembling from the adrenaline. She heard him enter. He stood behind her. She could feel his presence, the heat radiating from him. "That was a stupid thing to do," he said. "He had no right," she whispered. "He's a made man. You're a civilian. You don't talk to him like that. He could have hurt you." "Like you hurt him?" she shot back, turning to face him. "Yes." They were close. Too close. The space between them crackled. His eyes were not cold. They were on fire. He was looking at her, really looking at her, as if for the first time. He saw the spirit that had stood up to his man, the same spirit that had beaten on his chest. He saw her fear, and he saw that she had acted anyway. "You," he said, his voice a low growl, "are unexpected." He reached out, not fast, but deliberately. His hand came up to her face. She flinched, but she did not pull away. His callous thumb brushed her cheekbone. "You were shaking," he observed. "I was scared," she admitted. "But you did it anyway." His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air left her lungs. This was it. The moment she had been dreading, and she realized with a jolt, anticipating. He leaned in. It was slow, glacial. He was giving her every chance to run. She was frozen. Not with fear, but with a paralyzing, terrifying curiosity. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not soft. It was deliberate. It was possession. It was a claim, staked with an agonizing, pent-up pressure. His lips were firm, warm, and demanding. His other hand came up, tangling in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. He tasted of expensive whiskey and a loneliness so profound it stole her breath. He kissed her as if she were the only thing in his sterile, violent world that was real, as if, he thought, she might vanish. A small, broken sound escaped her throat. The sound snapped him back to reality. Elena pulled back, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with fear. She touched her lips, which were tingling, bruised. Damien stared at her, his own breathing ragged. The mask was gone. In its place was a raw, vulnerable hunger that terrified her more than his violence. "Elena," he breathed. She turned and ran. She fled to the guest room he had given her and locked the door, her back sliding down the wood until she was sitting on the floor, her heart trying to escape her chest. A few days later, Vince brought her a box. "The boss had your apartment cleared out," he said. "Things he thought you might want. Sentimental." She sorted through it, numb. Old photos, her mother's jewelry. And then she found it. A small, leather-bound notebook, her father's. He had been a meticulous accountant. She flipped through the pages, numbers, dates, boring entries, until one page, a list of names, and next to them, coded notes. One name stood out, S. Moretti. Damien's father, tucked into the back pocket of the notebook, was an old, faded photograph. Her father, much younger, standing outside an office building. He was wearing a company-issued windbreaker. On the breast of the jacket was a small, embroidered logo, the Moretti family crest, the same one on Damien's signet ring. Her father, the quiet, gentle man who read her bedtime stories, had worked for the most dangerous crime family in the city. His death, a supposed robbery, a mugging gone wrong just weeks after Damien's mother was killed, was not a robbery at all. It was an execution. Damien, in his office, read the report his PI had just delivered, a deep background on Alberto Russo. He was on our books for 5 years. The report concluded. He was Santi Moretti's private accountant. He disappeared on October 12th, 19 years ago, the same week as the betrayal. Damien leaned back in his chair. The girl, the ring, the accountant, the Carvalhos. It was all one story. Elena Russo was not just a random girl. She was the key. Her father had hidden the truth, and he had, somehow, passed that key to her. Damien looked at his hand, the one that had held her. He could still feel the softness of her skin, still taste the fear and fire on her lips. He was no longer just protecting an asset. He was emotionally entangled. And in his world, emotions were a liability that could get you killed. The new penthouse was different. The first safe house had been a sterile glass box, a waiting room. This place, high above the city center, was his. It was darker, furnished with heavy, masculine furniture, rich woods, and shelves filled with books that looked red. It smelled like him, that faint, clean scent of iron and expensive spice. It was, in every way, a more luxurious, more personal, more permanent cage. "I will not be moved around like your luggage," Elena had seethed, standing in the middle of the enormous walk-in closet he had designated for her. It was already filled with clothes, tags still attached. "This is my primary residence. It's the most secure building in Crescent Bay," Damien had replied, not even looking at her. He was checking the security feed on a wall-mounted screen. "You are safer here. My men are on every floor." "Safer," she scoffed. "Or easier to watch." He turned to her then, his eyes flat. "Both." Her anger simmered for days. She was his possession, his talking prop, the woman with his mother's ring, but the anger was a thin shield, and it was beginning to crack. The shift happened on a Tuesday. Vince, her silent shadow turned reluctant guardian, was driving her. Not to the diner, not home, but to a pristine, white building on the other side of the bay. "Where are we?" she asked, her stomach tightening. "The clinic," he rumbled. "The boss said you could see your mother. 30 minutes. We stay on the ground floor." Elena's breath caught. She had spoken to her mother on a clean, untraceable burner phone Damien had provided, but the calls were short, and her mother sounded tired. She was led into a private room that looked more like a 5-star hotel suite. And there was her mother, propped up on plush pillows, watching a large television. She was pale, yes, and thin, but her eyes were clear. The constant, panicked fragility Elena was used to seeing was gone. "Elena!" her mother cried, her face lighting up. "Mom!" Elena rushed forward, grasping her mother's hand. How are you feeling? They're treating you well?" "Oh, sweetheart," she gushed, her voice stronger than it had been in a year. "It's a miracle. This place, the doctors, they have a new experimental treatment, and Elena, the bills." She was weeping now, fat tears of relief. "Someone, and some anonymous donor, they paid for everything, the entire treatment, all the past due invoices. We're free. Honey, it's all taken care of." Elena stared at her, the truth hitting her with the force of a physical blow. The specialist from Baltimore, the private clinic, an anonymous donor. She held her mother for the full 30 minutes, her mind reeling. When Vince tapped her on the shoulder, she followed him back to the car, her body numb. That night, she waited for Damien in the dark, her heart a heavy, confused drum in her chest. He entered the penthouse just after 2 in the morning, weariness clinging to him like a second suit. He stopped when he saw her silhouette by the window. "You went to the clinic," he stated. It was not a question. "You paid for it all," she whispered, turning to face him. "The past debts, the new treatments, everything. Why?" He shrugged, loosening his tie as he walked to the bar. "She's your mother. You were worried. It was a distraction." "A distraction?" Her voice cracked. That's a fortune. That's her life. You did that, And you didn't even tell me." He poured a whiskey, his back to her. "It's just money. Elena, it's done. Now she is safe. And you can focus." "Focus on what?" she cried. "On being your prisoner?" He turned, his eyes suddenly intense, the whiskey forgotten. "On surviving, on what happens when they come for you again, and they will come. That money, it's nothing. It means you are here, with me, and not distracted by a dying relative. That's all." It was a practical move. But she saw through it. She saw the lie. He had called it a distraction. But he had done it quietly, anonymously. He didn't want thanks. He had done it because, for a man who dealt in brutality, it was the only way he knew how to be gentle. He had saved her mother's life, and he was too proud, or too damaged, to admit it was anything other than a tactic. The anger was gone. In its place was a terrifying, aching confusion. She hated him for what he was, but what was she supposed to do with the part of him that had just performed an act of profound kindness? The wall between them, once high and solid, was now crumbling. He started training her. "If you are to be in my world, you will not be helpless," he declared one afternoon. He took her to a private, soundproofed range in the building's sub-basement. He placed a small, sleek black pistol on the table. I can't," she said, backing away. "Yes, you can." His voice was firm. He stood behind her, his body close. He wrapped her hands around the grip, his larger, calloused hands covering hers. His proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of iron and soap. "This is not a toy," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "You do not point it at anything you do not intend to destroy. You breathe out. You squeeze. You do not jerk." He corrected her stance, his hands on her waist, on her shoulders, turning her body until she was aligned. Each touch was impersonal, precise, and yet it set her skin on fire. The first shot was deafening. It bucked in her hand, and she screamed, dropping it. He simply picked it up. Again. He taught her for an hour, and then another. He was a patient, exacting teacher. By the end, she was hitting the paper target. She was shaking, horrified by the power in her hands, but she had done it. He taught her how to use the burner phone properly. No names, no locations. You speak for no more than 3 minutes. You assume they are always listening. He began to trust her. He would take calls in front of her, his language clipped, coded, but she was learning to decipher it. He spoke of shipments at the docks, of percentages, of meetings with men she understood were not businessmen. He was testing her, leaving small pieces of his operation exposed. And she just listened. She didn't ask questions. She just absorbed it, filed it away. She was becoming a part of his world, not just a prisoner in it. While he was out, she turned her attention to the one piece of her old life she had left, her father's notebook. She sat for hours, cross-legged on the plush rug, staring at the pages, the coded names, S, Moretti, and others, V, Carvalho, a list of dates, and then a line, scribbled in the margin, C, B, storage, Unit 14B, the key is the mother, Crescent Bay storage, Unit 14B, the key is the mother. She looked at the ring on her finger, his mother's ring. The ring Damien had said held a secret. Her father had known. He had known about the ring. He had worked for Damien's father, and he had hidden something the Carvalhos were now hunting her for. She was no longer just a pawn. She was the map. The gala was a strategic necessity. "It's the annual syndicate benefit," Damien said, adjusting his cufflinks. He was in a black tuxedo that made him look less like a gangster and more like a dark prince. "Every family in the city will be there. You will be on my arm." "Why?" she asked, her hand smoothing down the dress he'd had delivered. It was silk, the color of a deep emerald, and it clung to her body in a way that felt both beautiful and terrifyingly exposed. "Because the lie we told the world must be seen. They must see the ring. They must see you," he said, walking over to her. He fastened a simple, impossibly heavy diamond necklace around her throat. His fingers brushed her skin, a feather-light touch that made her shiver. "They must see that you are mine, and that to touch you is to declare war on me. The ballroom was a sea of glittering jewels and dark suits. It was beautiful, civilized, and Elena had never been in a room with so many predators. The air was thick with false smiles, whispered threats, and the heavy scent of money and power. Men watched her. Their wives watched her. She felt like a prized horse, trotted out for inspection. Her body was rigid, her smile painted on. "Relax," Damien whispered, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. His touch was a brand, a shield. "They're all staring," she murmured, her nails digging into her own palms. "Let them. You're with me." A portly man with a flushed face and small, cruel eyes approached them. He was flanked by two younger, leaner men. "Damien," the man said, his voice oily. "A pleasure. You've been keeping company." His eyes raked over Elena, hungry and assessing. "Ricardo," Damien replied, his voice dropping a degree. He stepped slightly, shielding Elena with his own body. "Ricardo Carvalho, this is my fiancé. Elena." Elena's blood ran cold. This was the man who had hunted her, the man who had caused his mother's death. She forced her chin up. "Mr. Carvalho." Ricardo's smile widened. "Russo," he said, testing the name. "Such a pleasure. You must be very special. To catch Damien's eye, and to wear that ring." "I am," Elena said, her voice clear, surprising herself. Damien's hand tightened on her back, a silent signal of approval. "Enjoy the party, Ricardo," Damien said. It was a dismissal. They walked away, but Elena could feel Carvalho's eyes burning into her back. "Your hand is shaking," Damien murmured, leaning close to her ear as they moved through the crowd. "He's the one," she whispered. "I know. He's looking at the ring. He knows what it is. And now he knows he can't get to it." His voice was a low, protective rumble, meant only for her. "Stay with me. Don't leave my side. Not for a second when He kept her close all night. His hand never left her. He was a fortress, and for the first time in her life, surrounded by enemies. She felt utterly, terrifyingly safe. The adrenaline of the night carried them back to the penthouse. The silence was heavy, charged, the gala, the threats, Ricardo Carvalho. It had all been a performance, and now the curtain was down. Elena's hands were still shaking. She went to the kitchen, her heels clicking on the marble, and poured a glass of water. Damien followed, loosening his black tie. He watched her, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms. He was no longer the prince. He was the boss. "You did well tonight," he said. "I was terrified." She drank the water, her throat dry. "I know, you did it anyway." He walked toward her, stopping only a foot away. The space between them crackled, the memory of their first kiss. Weeks ago, hung in the air. "They look at you like you're a piece of meat," she said, her voice low. "You're not meat," he said. "You're mine." She looked up at him, at this violent, complicated man who had saved her, trained her, and protected her, the man who had confessed his mother's murder. "What does that mean, Damien?" she whispered. "What am I to you?" He looked at her, his dark eyes tracing her features, her mouth, her throat, the fear and fire in her eyes. "It means," he growled, "that I'm done pretending." She didn't run. She didn't flinch. This time, she met his gaze, and with a surge of courage born from the night's terror, she reached up, her fingers grazing his loosened tie. She pulled, gently. It was all the invitation he needed. He surged forward, closing the distance. His mouth crashed down on hers. It was not the slow, deliberate kiss from before. This was raw, pent-up urgency. It was a claiming. It was the gala, the threats, the years of loneliness, all pouring out of him. His hands were in her hair, tilting her head back, his mouth plundering hers. She gasped into the kiss, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, holding on as if the world were tilting. He broke the kiss, only to trail his mouth down her jaw to the sensitive skin of her throat, inhaling her scent. "Elena," he groaned, his voice rough. Then, with a suddenness that stole her breath, he hooked one arm under her legs and the other around her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He didn't stop kissing her. He turned and sat her on the cold marble kitchen counter. She was eye level with him now. His hands framed her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. The raw urgency was still there, burning in his eyes, but his touch was different. His hands were slow, reverent. He kissed her again, but this time, the desperation was tempered with a gentleness she had never known. It was a kiss of profound, aching need, but also of care. His lips were soft, questioning, asking for permission he had already taken, and she gave it. She wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer, her hands tangling in his hair, meeting his passion with her own. This was not a monster. This was a man. A man who had built walls so high he had forgotten how to be gentle, and was learning again. With her. For Elena, it was a different kind of revelation. Her entire life had been about fear. Fear of the bills, of the neighborhood, of her mother's illness. She had never, not once, felt truly safe. Until now. Cradled in the arms of the most dangerous man in Crescent Bay, his mouth on hers, his body shielding her from the world, she was, for the first time, completely safe. The kiss deepened, becoming a slow, emotional exploration. It was the trust he had built teaching her to shoot. It was the gratitude she felt for her mother's life. It was the shared terror of the gala. It was all of it, culminating in this one, desperate, healing moment on the kitchen counter. Later, they were in the living room. The city lights glittered below, but they were in their own world. She was curled on the sofa, wearing one of his shirts, and he was sitting on the floor, leaning against the cushions, a glass of water in his hand. The air was charged, vulnerable. He was staring into the darkness, his profile rigid. "I haven't," he started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. "I haven't been with anyone. Not like this." Elena watched him, her heart aching. "Not since her," he whispered. "Her? My last fiancé, Alyssa," he said the name as if it hurt. She was killed. It was a message from Carvalho, meant for me. She was driving my car." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Damien." She was collateral, just gone. He closed his eyes. "After that, I couldn't. Touching someone. It meant they were a target. It meant weakness. It meant getting them killed." He turned and looked at her, and his eyes were filled with a torment so deep it made her want to weep. "And here I am, doing it again. Putting my mother's ring on your finger and pulling you into my bed. I'm putting a target on your back. Elena." She crawled off the sofa and knelt in front of him. She took his face in her hands, her small, warm palms against his rough jaw. "You didn't put the target there, Damien," she said, her voice fierce. "It was already there. You decided to stand in front of me." She realized with a terrifying certainty that she was falling for him. This man of ghosts, this king of a violent, broken world, he wasn't just her protector. He was hers. She went to the bathroom, her body humming, her mind trying to process the night. Damien. His confession, her father's notebook. She splashed cold water on her face, then looked at herself in the mirror. The emerald silk dress was puddled on the floor. His shirt was huge on her, and the ring was on her finger. The key is the mother. She looked around the counter. Damien was meticulous. A small leather grooming kit was open. Inside, among other things, was a tiny, pen-sized flashlight. She clicked it. A beam of bright, purple-blue UV light shot out. He must use it to check currency. Her hand was trembling. She held the light over the ring. She gasped. The black opal remained dark, but inside the band, etched into the dark gold, characters glowed in a faint, ethereal blue. It was not a secret. It was a code. The glowing blue characters were stark against the dark gold. Elena's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the tiny flashlight steady. A string of numbers and letters. 14, B881-9, C, B, storage, Unit 14, B. Her father's note. The key is the mother. The ring was the key. The code was the access. She ran from the bathroom, her heart hammering, her feet bare on the cold marble. Damien was still on the floor, leaning against the sofa, his head in his hands. The confession of his past, the intimacy of their night, hung heavy in the air. Damien. He looked up, his eyes shadowed, vulnerable. He saw the ring in her hand, the UV light in the other. "What is it?" "My father's notebook," she said, her voice trembling. It mentioned a storage unit, Crescent Bay Storage, Unit 14B. It said the key is the mother. Damien. "I think this is the key." She held out the ring. He was on his feet in an instant, the vulnerability gone, replaced by a sharp, lethal focus. He took the small light from her, his fingers brushing hers, and examined the inscription. He read the code aloud. 14B 8819. He strode to his desk, grabbed the leather-bound notebook, and flipped to the page she had marked. He stared at the two pieces of the puzzle, separated by 2 decades. "His handwriting," he whispered, "and my mother's ring. What does it mean?" "It means your father was smarter than anyone knew," he said, his voice grim. "He didn't just know about the betrayal. He cataloged it, and he hid it, using the one thing he knew Santi Moretti's son would never, ever part with." He was already pulling on his shoes, grabbing a jacket. "Vince!" he yelled. The heavy footsteps of his bodyguard were audible almost instantly. "Get the car. We're going out, now." "Where?" Elena asked, pulling on her own clothes, her hands fumbling with the buttons. "To see what your father left for us?" The storage facility was in the industrial part of the bay, a place of rust and corrugated steel. The dawn was a smear of gray, the air cold and damp. Vince stayed with the car, a silent mountain, while Damien, his hand never far from the weapon Elena knew was beneath his jacket, led her to the unit. He punched in the code, 8819. There was a loud click. The metal door rattled up, revealing a small, dark space that smelled of dust and old secrets. It was filled with boxes, all neatly labeled, Alberto Russo, personal. "He kept it," Damien murmured, his voice echoing in the small space. He walked inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He found a box labeled taxes, 1990 to 1995. He pulled it from the shelf, set it on the concrete floor, and tore it open. Inside were neat stacks of files, old ledgers, and tax returns. At the very bottom, beneath a false panel, was a small, heavy, bank-issued safe deposit box. It was locked. Damien didn't hesitate. He pulled the pistol from his waistband, aimed it at the lock, and fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Elena screamed. Clapping her hands over her ears, he ripped the damaged lid open. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a single, silver USB drive. The drive back to the penthouse was silent. The tension was so thick. Elena felt she could barely breathe. They entered the apartment, the morning light now streaming through the windows, and Damien went straight to his office. He slotted the drive into his laptop. A single folder appeared on the screen. He clicked it. It was everything. Scanned ledgers, offshore bank statements, audio files, photographs, a meticulous, damning catalog of the Carvalho Syndicate's illegal operations, stretching back 20 years. But it was more than that. It was a list of names, corrupt city officials, police captains, 2 judges, all on Ricardo Carvalho's payroll. And then Damien froze. His face, which had been a mask of grim satisfaction, went utterly pale. He clicked on a file, a bank transfer, a payment, made 2 days after his mother's death, a consulting fee of $50,000. The recipient was not a Carvalho. The account was routed through a shell corporation, but the name on the incorporation documents was one Damien knew, Antonio, the man with the dead eyes, the man he had beaten for his sloppiness, the man who had sneered at Elena. He wasn't just sloppy. He wasn't just a brute. He was the traitor, the one who had sold out Damien's mother. He had been Carvalho's man from the very beginning. "Damien?" Elena whispered. Seeing the change in him, he didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, the silence in the room becoming a roaring, terrible void. The betrayal was absolute, a knife twisted in a wound that had never healed. Elena. Misreading his silence, felt a cold dread. He was pulling away, back into the dark world she couldn't follow. I should go, she said, her voice small. I'd like to visit my mother, just for an hour, to see if the new treatments are... Damien looked up, his eyes black, unfocused. What? My mother, can I go? He seemed to process the words from a great distance. Yes, fine. His mind was already spinning, calculating, the rage building beneath the ice. He was so lost in the betrayal. He didn't follow his own protocol. He didn't assign Vince. He picked up his phone. His voice clipped. Transport pool. I need a car for Miss Russo. The clinic. Now. He hung up and looked at her. Go. An hour. Check in when you get there. Elena nodded, relieved to escape the suffocating atmosphere. She grabbed her coat, the black opal heavy on her finger, and left him alone with his ghosts and the glowing screen. The car was a black sedan, not the usual SUV. The driver was new, a man she didn't recognize, but he wore the Moretti pin, so she got in. The drive was quiet. She watched the city pass, her mind on the USB drive, on Antonio, on the way Damien had looked right through her. She realized, 10 minutes in, that they were not on the route to the clinic. This isn't the way, she said, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold. Detour. There's construction on the bridge. Elena's heart began to hammer. Damien's voice in her head. You assume they are always listening. You look for the exits. She looked at the door handle. She was in the industrial district, the same area as the storage unit. The streets were empty. The car slowed, pulling into a deserted alley. What are you doing? She demanded. The car stopped. The back doors were pulled open from the outside. Standing there, a sickly smile on his face, was Antonio. Hello, ragazza, he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Missed me. Elena lunged for the other door, but a second man was there. Antonio grabbed her, his grip like steel. She opened her mouth to scream, but he clamped a thick, chemical-smelling cloth over her face. She fought, kicking, scratching, but her lungs burned, her vision tunneled. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Antonio's triumphant, hateful eyes. Damien was staring at the name. Antonio. The rage was a cold, solid block of ice in his chest. He was calculating the cleanest way to kill him. His phone buzzed, the 1-hour mark. No call from Elena. He dialed her burner. It rang, and went to voicemail. He stood. Vince! Vince entered, his face grim. Boss, track Elena's car. Now. Vince was already on his tablet. His thick fingers flew. A second later, his face went gray. Boss, the car, it's in the warehouse district. It's been stationary for 20 minutes. The driver, it's not one of our regulars. Damien's ice block of rage shattered, exploding into a white-hot inferno. The betrayal. The distraction. His mistake. He had let her go. Who assigned the driver? He roared. It was routed by Antonio. Boss, from the transport pool. Damien's control, the legendary, ironclad discipline that ruled his empire, evaporated. He let out a sound that was not human, a roar of pure, animalistic fury. He stormed through the penthouse, grabbing his keys. He didn't go to Antonio's assigned apartment. He went to the private condo he knew Antonio kept, the one bought with Carvalho's blood money. He didn't knock. He kicked the door off its hinges. The apartment was empty, cleared out. A half-full glass of whiskey sat on the counter. He'd fled. Find him, Damien snarled into his phone, his voice a low, terrifying growl to his entire network. Shut down the ports. Shut down the airport. I want his picture sent to every man on my payroll. Find him, and find her. Bring her back to me. Him? I don't care how you do it. Just bring me what's left. He swept his arm across the bar, sending bottles of expensive liquor crashing to the floor. He tore the apartment apart, his rage a physical, destructive force. He was not a boss. He was a man who had been betrayed, and the one thing he cared about had been taken from him. He had put his mother's ring on her finger, and he had let her walk into a trap. Elena woke to the smell of rust and damp concrete. Her head was pounding. She was tied to a metal chair in the middle of a vast, dark warehouse. Her hands were bound behind her. "She's awake," a voice said. Antonio stepped out of the shadows, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good, you were getting boring." "Where am I?" she croaked. "A parting gift from my new employer," Antonio said, grabbing her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Turns out, Mr. Carvalho pays much, much better than Damien, and he wants what's his." He yanked her left hand, his eyes landing on the opal. "This ring. He's been looking for this for a long time." He pulled a pair of bolt cutters from a table. "He said he wants the ring. He didn't say anything about the finger." Elena's blood ran cold. You were the one. You betrayed them. You killed his mother." Antonio's face darkened. "I did what I had to. That old man, Sante, he was weak. Damien is weak, too. All that moping about his mother, all that feeling," he sneered. "And you made him weaker." He hefted the cutters. "Let's get this over with him. He'll kill you," Elena spat, her voice shaking. "He has to find me first." He left her with 2 guards. "Watch her. I'll be back." Elena watched him go, panic giving way to the cold. Clear training Damien had drilled into her. "You are not helpless. You breathe. You look. You act." The guards were lazy. They sat at a card table 10 feet away, an open bottle between them. She was tied with thick zip ties. She scanned the area, a high, broken window, piles of wooden crates. Her chair was old, metal, a piece of rusted rebar sticking out from the leg. She began to move, subtly, rubbing the thick plastic of the zip tie against the sharp, rusted edge. It was slow. It bit into her skin, but she ignored the pain. "Squeeze, don't jerk." She worked at it, the plastic groaning. The guards were arguing over their game. One of them stood, stretching. "I'm going to take a piss." He walked off into the shadows. One guard left. Elena pulled, hard. The zip tie snapped. She didn't hesitate. She stood, her legs wobbly. The remaining guard looked up, his eyes widening. "Hey!" She didn't run at him. She ran away, shoving a tall, unstable stack of crates. They toppled, crashing down between her and the guard, a wall of splintering wood. He roared, pulling his gun. She scrambled, climbing a set of metal shelves, heading for the broken window. It was her only way out. She heard a shot, the bullet whining off the metal beside her head. She pulled herself up, her arms screaming. She got to the window. It was a 12-foot drop to the alley below. The guard was right behind her, grabbing at her ankle. She kicked back, her heel connecting with his nose with a wet crunch. He howled, falling back. Elena pulled herself through the jagged, broken glass. Slicing her arm open, she didn't feel it. She just pushed off and fell. She landed wrong. All her weight came down on her left leg. A snap, and a pain so white-hot it blinded her. Her ankle, broken. She cried out, but she didn't stop. Adrenaline surged. She began to crawl. Out of the alley, toward the street. It had started to rain, a cold, miserable downpour. She was crawling through the grime, dragging her useless leg, sobbing. Damien was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mind a red haze of fury and fear. He was in the warehouse district, his hunters all around him, but he was doing the searching himself. He skidded around a corner, his headlights cutting through the rain, and he saw her, a small, crumpled shape, crawling from an alley. She was covered in mud and blood, her hair plastered to her face. He slammed on the brakes, his car fishtailing. He was out before it even stopped moving. The door flying open. "Elena!" She looked up, her face a mask of agony and relief. "Damien!" He fell to his knees in the middle of the street, in the filth and the rain, and pulled her into his arms. His entire body was shaking. He wasn't the boss. He wasn't a killer. He was just a man, and his world had almost ended. He held the back of her head, his face buried in her wet hair, his shoulders heaving. He was whispering her name over and over, like a prayer. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." He lifted her, cradling her to his chest. She was so light, so broken. He carried her to his car, his coat shielding her from the rain. He placed her gently in the passenger seat, his movements infinitely tender. He kissed her forehead, his lips trembling. "No more running," he whispered. his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard. "You're mine now. I am never letting you go." She woke to the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. The room was white, sterile, a hospital. Her ankle was in a heavy cast, her arm stitched and bandaged. She turned her head, wincing. He was there. Damien was asleep in the chair by her bed, his head down on the mattress, one of his hands clutching hers. He was not the immaculate man she knew. His clothes were still damp, stained with her blood and the grime of the street. He had a dark, angry bruise on his jaw, and a line of fresh stitches above his right eyebrow. He hadn't just given orders. He had gone hunting. She squeezed his hand, his head snapped up, his eyes wild, dark with exhaustion and fear. Then he saw her. He saw she was awake. "Elena," he breathed. He was on his feet in an instant, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. The doctor said, "Your ankle is broken, a clean break, and you lost blood, but you're stable." "You're hurt," she whispered, her fingers tracing the bruise on his jaw. "It's nothing." He closed his eyes, his relief so profound it was a physical thing. "When I saw you, in the street, I thought—" He couldn't finish. She saw the terror still lingering in his eyes, the fear of losing her. She took his bruised, stitched hand and lifted it. She didn't kiss it. She pulled it under the thin hospital gown, pressing his rough palm flat against her chest, directly over her heart. "Feel that," she whispered. His hand splayed, his breath catching as he felt the steady, strong thump, thump, thump of her heartbeat against his skin. He choked on a sob, a raw, broken sound. He leaned down, burying his face in her hair. He was shaking. When he lifted his head, the last of his walls were gone. He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a raw, desperate, healing love. He kissed her. It was not the fire of the kitchen. It was not a claim. He kissed her forehead. He kissed her stitched arm. He kissed her eyelids. Each one was a promise, a vow. Then finally, his lips touched hers. It was slow, agonizingly gentle. He cradled her face as if she were made of spun glass, kissing her like she was something sacred, something he did not deserve but could not live without. The door opened. Vince stood there, his face grim. "Boss?" Damien pulled back, the steel returning to his eyes. "What?" "We got Antonio. He's handled." Vince's eyes were dark. "But the news is bad. Carvalho knows we have the drive. He knows we access the files. He's called in every favor, every marker. He's not hiding anymore. He's declared war. He's coming for all of it. He's coming for you, and he's coming for her." Damien's face hardened. He nodded. Once. He turned back to Elena, the tenderness still there, but now tempered with a cold resolve. "I'm getting you out of the city, a plane to Switzerland. Tonight, you'll be safe there." Elena, her heart steady beneath his hand, shook her head. She struggled to sit up, the pain from her ankle sharp, but her eyes were sharper. The terrified waitress from the diner was gone. "No. Elena, this is not a discussion. You're not safe here. He wants you dead." "No," she said again, her voice clear and strong. "I'm done being a pawn. I'm done being the girl who gets rescued, the girl who runs. He came after me because of my father, because of what we found. He put this target on my back. Not you." She gripped his hand, the one still resting on her heart. "I'm not running. I'm staying. I'm going to help you finish this. Together." Damien stared at her, at the fire in her eyes, the unbreakable spirit. He saw the woman she had become, his queen. He leaned down and kissed her, a short, hard kiss of equals. Together. The war room was Damien's office, and Elena, her foot propped up on a stool in a new, lighter cast, was at the center of it. The past 2 days had been a blur of cold fury and precise, calculated moves. The USB drive, her father's legacy, was their sword. Damien was on the phone, his voice a flat, deadly monotone. He was not negotiating. He was giving orders. "Judge Halloran," he said, his eyes on a name on the screen. "You have, for the past 6 years, accepted payments from Ricardo Carvalho. I have the bank statements. As of this morning, you will sign the injunction to freeze all assets tied to Carvalho imports. You will not ask why. You will simply do it, or this drive and your name will be on every news desk by noon." He hung up without waiting for a reply and dialed the next number. Elena, meanwhile, was on her own laptop, coordinating with a public relations firm Damien kept on retainer. "The event is not a fundraiser," she explained, her voice crisp, authoritative. The terrified waitress was a distant memory. "It is an engagement party. We're announcing our wedding date, yes. The press list you have is correct, all of them. And I want a specific stringer from the Crescent Bay Times at the front table. She's hungry. She'll print exactly what we give her." She was spinning the narrative. Damien was cutting the financial arteries. They were a two-front war. "Police commissioner," Damien continued, his voice dropping. "You have 2 officers on your payroll. Their names are, yes, you know the ones. They will be reassigned to the morgue, and you will pull the security details from Carvalho's primary residence. You will do this because I asked you to." One by one, the pillars holding up Ricardo Carvalho's empire began to crumble. His accounts were frozen. His protection vanished. His political allies turned their backs. The engagement party was the final public execution. It was held in the grand ballroom of a hotel Damien owned. Elena, in a stunning floor-length silver gown, stood beside him, her hand linked in his. The black opal on her finger caught the flash of 100 cameras. They were the image of a power couple, beautiful, untouchable, in love. "We are so thrilled to share our joy," Elena said, her voice smooth, her smile practiced. "But we are also aware that our happiness has attracted negative attention. Mr. Carvalho's recent violent actions, they are the desperate moves of a failing man. We are cooperating fully with the authorities to put an end to his extremism." They painted Carvalho as an unhinged stalker, a violent extremist obsessed with them. The narrative was set. The press ate it up. They left the party in a hail of flashing bulbs, a perfect picture of defiant love. The moment the armored SUV doors closed, Damien's face hardened. "It's done." "He'll be furious," Elena whispered, the adrenaline fading. "He'll be desperate," Damien corrected. The call came from Vince, who was driving. "Boss, the penthouse isn't safe. The hit was just confirmed. It's not just on you anymore. It's on her, too. High level. They're offering 8 figures. Every professional in the state will be coming out of the woodwork." Damien looked at Elena. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "Change course," Damien ordered. "We're going to ground." The bunker was a relic of a bygone era, built by a paranoid billionaire decades ago and bought by Damien's father. It was 20 miles outside the city, buried in a hillside, a hidden concrete scar. The entrance was a steel door hidden inside an old, collapsed barn. Inside, it was not the luxury of the penthouse. It was functional, cold, and claustrophobic. Concrete walls, industrial lighting, a ventilation system that hummed, but it was stocked with food, weapons, and its own power supply. It was the safest place on Earth. For 2 days, they were alone. Vince and 2 other trusted men patrolled the perimeter above ground, but down here, it was just them. The silence was absolute. The war outside felt 1,000,000 miles away. The adrenaline of the fight, the planning, the public appearances, it all bled away, leaving something raw and quiet in its wake. On the 3rd night, Elena was sitting on the simple cot, tracing the pattern on the opal ring. Damien was at a communications desk, quietly giving orders, tying up the last loose ends before his final move. "Damien," she said, her voice small in the concrete room. He turned, his focus instantly on her. "What is it? Are you hurt?" "No?" She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "What happens after?" "After what?" "After him? After Carvalho, when it's all done, and he's gone, and you. You have your revenge, and your family is safe." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What happens to me? When you don't need me anymore?" The question hung in the air, terrible and vulnerable. She was the girl from the diner again, The one with nothing. The one who was temporary. The USB was found. The traitor was dead. The plan was in motion. Her purpose was almost served. Damien's face softened. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt in front of her, his knees on the cold concrete. He took her face in his hands, his rough palms cupping her jaw. "You think this," he said, his voice a low, fierce rumble, "is about need. You think I did this, that I put my mother's ring on your finger, because I needed a key to a storage unit? She started, a tear escaping. "I don't know. I needed that, yes," he admitted. "But Elena..." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I haven't slept through the night in 10 years. Not until I met you. I haven't breathed. My entire life has been about vengeance. About this cold, empty house I had to protect, and then you fell into it. You, with your impossible, terrified courage. You, who stood up to my men. You, who were willing to stand beside me in a room full of killers." He pulled back, his dark eyes burning into hers. "Need has nothing to do with it. You're not an asset. Elena, you're already mine." She let out a small, broken sob. It was the confession she had been desperate to hear, that she was not a tool, that she was his. He kissed her, a slow, gentle kiss that tasted of salt and forever. He stood, pulling her up with him. Her cast made her unsteady, and he held her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist. "The cot is too small," he whispered, his voice rough. He led her to the small, private bedroom, the one meant for the owner of the bunker. The bed was larger, the sheets clean, the room was still concrete, still a fortress. But with him, it was a sanctuary. He sat her on the edge of the bed, his movements infinitely careful. He was so aware of her injuries, her fragility. He knelt and began to unlace her good shoe. "Damien," she whispered, her hands trembling. He looked up, and the hunger in his eyes was banked, overshadowed by a profound, aching tenderness. He was not the boss. He was not the killer. He was the man who had held her when she cried, the man who had covered her with his coat. He began to undress her, his hands slow, reverent. Each button on her shirt was a question. Each brush of his fingers against her skin was a reassurance. He slid the shirt off her shoulders. He unfastened her jeans, his movements careful, gently easing them down over her cast, his touch feather light. He whispered to her, reassurances, words of praise. He told her she was beautiful. He told her she was safe. He told her she was his. When she was bare, he wrapped her in the blankets, his eyes drinking her in as if she were sacred. And Elena cried. She wept, her hands covering her face, silent, body-shaking sobs. He was instantly at her side, his face etched with panic. "Elena, did I hurt you? What's wrong?" She shook her head, grabbing his hand, pulling it to her wet cheek. "No," she choked out. I'm... She couldn't find the words. It was not pain. It was not fear. It was the crushing, overwhelming, agonizing relief of being safe. It was the profound, earth-shattering realization that this man, this dangerous, broken, violent man, was her sanctuary. He'd seen all of her, her poverty, her fear, her weakness, her spirit, and he had not discarded her. He had cherished her. The longing she felt for him was so tangled with this new, terrifying feeling of safety that it was a pain all its own. "It's okay," he murmured, understanding. He lay down beside her, on top of the covers, and just held her. He kissed her tears, his lips gentle. "It's okay. You're safe. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." He held her until the sobs subsided, until her breathing evened out, and the tension left her body, replaced by a warm, liquid ache. She turned to him, her eyes clear, her heart open, and this time, she was the one who kissed him. It was a kiss of acceptance, of surrender, of a promise she was finally ready to make. The bunker was silent, save for their breathing. It was a slow, healing, emotional consummation, a quiet affirmation in the heart of the storm. The next morning, the world exploded. Elena woke first, to the smell of coffee. Damien was in the small kitchen alcove, his back to her, dressed in jeans and a dark shirt, A high-pitched whine echoed through the ventilation, followed by a muffled thump from above ground. Damien was moving before the sound even registered. He launched himself across the room, grabbed Elena, and threw them both to the floor, covering her body with his own. A second later, the main steel door of the bunker bowed inward with a deafening boom. It was a shaped charge. "They found us," he hissed, his voice lethal. He was already dragging her toward a small, secondary tunnel. "Someone talked, my inner circle. It's compromised." Gunfire erupted from the main corridor. The high-velocity rounds sparked off the concrete. "Go! Go!" he yelled, pushing her into the narrow escape tunnel. "It leads to the ridge. Keep moving." "I'm not leaving you," she screamed, her cast making her slow, clumsy. "You have to." He was firing back, methodical, controlled. 2 shots, a scream. He was a creature of violence, unleashed. He gave her a final, desperate shove. "I'll be right behind you." She scrambled down the tunnel, a claustrophobic metal tube. She heard him fighting, the sounds of the battle echoing. Then she heard a new sound, a heavy thud, and Damien's sharp, pained cry. "No!" She turned, crawling back. He was stumbling into the tunnel, his left arm clamped to his shoulder, blood gushing between his fingers. He slammed the hydraulic seal on the tunnel door, plunging them into near darkness. "Go!" he gritted out, his voice strained with agony. They half ran, half crawled, for what felt like an eternity. Emerging into the gray morning light through a hidden grate, they were in the woods, 100 yards from the barn. She dragged him behind a granite boulder, her body shaking. "You're hit. It's just the shoulder," he gasped, slumping against the rock, his face pale, beaded with sweat. Don't you lie to me," she sobbed. She tore at his shirt, her hands covered in his blood. It was a clean through and through, bad, but not fatal. If she was fast, she tore a strip from her own shirt, packing the wound as he'd taught her. Her hands shaking so badly she could barely think. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "You stupid you almost—" He looked at her, his vision blurring, a faint, pained smile on his lips. "I'm hard to kill." She finished the makeshift bandage, pulling it tight, making him cry out, and then, her hands still slick with his blood, she slapped him. A sharp, stinging sound that echoed in the quiet woods. It was not a slap of anger. It was a slap of pure, undiluted terror. "Don't you ever—" she hissed, her face inches from his, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Don't you ever do that to me again. Don't you ever put yourself in danger. Don't you ever, ever. Leave me." She grabbed the front of his bloody shirt and kissed him. A desperate, frantic, sobbing kiss. It was all her fear, all her love, all her rage pouring into him. He kissed her back, his good hand coming up to tangle in her hair, holding her. When they broke apart, his breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear. "Elena," he said, his voice urgent. That was my most trusted man, Sal. He was the only one who knew about this place. If he's turned, the rot is deep, deeper than Antonio." He gripped her arm. "This is the end game. I'm done hiding. I'm going to finish this. But I'm getting you out. For real this time. Vince has a plane. You're leaving." "No," she said. "This is not a debate. Elena, you saw what just happened. He will not stop until you are both dead." "And you saw what I just did," she shot back, her voice ringing with a strength she never knew she possessed. "I'm not the girl you saved. I'm the woman who just patched you up. I am not running." She reached for her left hand. The ring was gone. It must have come off in the struggle. She saw it, glinting in the dirt near the tunnel exit. She crawled, ignoring the pain in her ankle, and snatched it up. She shoved it back onto her finger, the black opal dark, covered in mud and his blood. She held it up, her hand steady, her eyes locked on his. "This ring holds a secret," she said, her voice shaking but unbroken. "Then let it also be a promise. I am not leaving you. I am your fiancé. I am your partner, and we are going to finish this." The final plan was forged in the cold, quiet hours before dawn, in a secure study in one of Damien's oldest family compounds. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic from Damien's fresh stitches and the bitter scent of black coffee. Vince, his face a mask of stone, stood by the door, the betrayal of Sal. A man who had served the Moretti family for 30 years had cut the final rotten piece from the organization. Damien was a man remade. The ice in his veins had been replaced by a quiet, focused fire. Elena was his center. "We cut the head off," Damien said, his voice low, his good hand tracing a map of the city. "We've frozen his assets. We've exposed his political allies. He's cornered, bleeding, and he's going to be stupid. He's still got a dozen loyalists," Vince rumbled. "Men who will die for him." "Good," Damien said. "They can—" The plan was simple. Damien would leak the final, most damning piece of the USB drive, the audio file of Ricardo Carvalho personally ordering the hit on Damien's mother, to a single, untraceable outlet. Then he would offer a truce. "A truce?" Elena asked, her voice sharp. She sat across from him, her broken ankle propped on a chair, the backup USB drive clutched in her hand. "A meeting," Damien corrected, his eyes meeting hers. "He'll see it as a surrender. He'll think I'm broken, that the attack on the bunker crippled me. He won't be able to resist. A cornered rat will always lunge for the throat. He'll set a trap," she said, her stomach twisting. "I know," Damien said, "and I'll be walking into it." "No." Elena stood, ignoring the pain in her foot. You will not go alone." "Vince will have a team, but I have to go in alone. He has to see me as weak, vulnerable." He looked at her, his expression unyielding. "You will be here. You will be safe." "I will not," she said, her voice ringing with the same iron he possessed. "I have been your prisoner. I have been your asset. I have been your partner. I will not, at the final moment, be your liability. I am coming. Damien." "Elena," he started, his voice a warning growl. "She's right, boss," Vince said. Surprising them both, Damien turned to him. "He knows she's your weakness. If she's not there, he'll think you have her hidden. He'll be suspicious. But if he thinks he has a chance to get her, he'll be reckless." Elena held up the backup drive. "I am the insurance. I am the one who holds the other copy. I'm not helpless. Let me come." Damien stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He saw the woman who had slapped him, the woman who had crawled through glass, the woman who had put the ring back on her own finger. He finally nodded. "Once. Vince. The surveillance van, 2 blocks out. She stays in the van. She is an observer, nothing more. If one bullet comes near that van, you get her out, you get her to the plane. Do you understand me, Elena? You do not move." She met his gaze, her heart pounding. "I understand." The meeting was set for an abandoned cathedral in the old district, a place of crumbling stone and broken stained glass. It was neutral ground, a place where business had been done for 100 years. Elena sat in the back of the surveillance van, a bank of high-definition monitors flickering in front of her. She had a headset, a direct line to Vince's team, and a tactical feed from 3 hidden cameras. Her laptop was open, the backup USB plugged in. She had spent the last hour working, her fingers flying, not just watching, but preparing. She watched Damien's car pull up. He got out. He was alone. His left arm was in a sleek black sling beneath his tailored suit jacket, a visible sign of the weakness Carvalho was expecting. He looked up, his eyes finding the hidden camera 2 blocks away, finding her. He gave a short, sharp nod and walked inside. Her heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. A moment later, Ricardo Carvalho's car arrived. He was not alone. 4 men flanked him as he stormed into the cathedral. On her monitor, she saw them meet in the center of the dusty, cavernous nave, light from the broken rose window streaming down on them. "You're a fool to come here, Damien," Carvalho sneered. He looked haggard, his face blotched with rage and sleeplessness. "You should have run. I'm here to offer you a choice." "Ricardo," Damien said, his voice calm, echoing slightly in the vast space. "You're done. Your accounts are gone. Your allies are in custody. It's over." "It's over when I say it's over," Carvalho roared. "It was over 20 years ago. Damien said, his voice dropping, carrying a deadly weight. "It was over the day you paid Sal and Antonio to ambush my father. The day you killed my mother." Carvalho froze. His bluster evaporated, replaced by a cold, reptilian stillness. You don't know." "I know everything," Damien said. "I have the ledgers from Alberto Russo. I have the bank transfers. I have the audio files." Elena's breath hitched. She watched, her hand tightening on the mouse, her father's name a prayer in her mind. Carvalho's face twisted into a grotesque mask of hatred. That accountant, that rat, he should have died cleanly. He started to laugh, a dry, cracked sound. "You Morettis, you're all the same. Sentimental fools. Your father, Sante, he loved his wife. And you love a broken-down waitress." He clapped his hands, a sharp, theatrical sound, from the balconies, from the confessionals, from the shadows behind the altar. A dozen more men appeared, their weapons all trained on Damien, an ambush. "You walked in here just like your mother walked into that car." "Damien," Carvalho taunted. "A willing sacrifice." "Not quite," Damien said. A small, cold smile on his lips. From the side aisles, Vince's men, who had been hidden for an hour, emerged. "Now!" Vince roared. The cathedral erupted. Gunfire exploded, the sound a deafening cacophony, echoing off the stone walls. It was chaos. Elena screamed, her hands flying to her headset, watching the monitors as they blurred into a sea of running figures and muzzle flashes. Damien had dived behind a heavy stone pillar, his good hand returning fire, his movements precise. But he was outgunned, and his injury made him slow. She saw Carvalho, protected by two guards, retreating toward a side exit. Then her blood ran cold. On the monitor connected to the camera behind the altar, she saw a figure. Sal, the traitor. He hadn't been with Carvalho. He had been waiting. He had a clear, unobstructed shot at Damien's back. "Damien," she screamed into the microphone, but it was just noise in the firefight. "Damien, behind you!" "It's Sal!" Damien was pinned down by two of Carvalho's men. He couldn't hear her. Sal raised his pistol, taking careful aim. Elena looked at the van door. She looked at Damien, trapped on the screen. "You do not move." She made her choice. She was not a prisoner. She was not an observer. "Vince, cover me," she yelled, grabbing her laptop. She hit the van door, stumbling out onto the pavement, her legs screaming in protest. "Elena, no, get back here," Vince yelled over the comms. She ignored him, half running, half limping toward the great oak doors of the cathedral. She held the laptop open in one arm, her fingers finding the key she had prepared. She hit enter. She burst through the doors. "Ricardo!" Her voice, high and desperate, cut through the gunfire. Everyone froze. Damien, Carvalho, Sal. Elena stood in the doorway, a vision of absolute, terrified defiance. She was holding her laptop high, the screen facing out. "It's live! Ricardo!" she screamed, her voice shaking. "I'm streaming to every news channel in this city. They're all watching. The whole world is watching you." Carvalho stared, his face a mask of disbelief. On the laptop screen, his own horrified face stared back. Elena had hacked the emergency broadcast network. The feed of the gun battle, of Carvalho's ambush, was being plastered across every television in Crescent Bay. "This is for my father, Alberto Russo," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "And this is for his mother." Sal, seeing the game was over, his betrayal now public, made a final, desperate move. He turned his gun from Damien to Carvalho, but he never fired. Vince, having followed Elena, was in the doorway behind her. He raised his weapon. A single, muffled shot. Sal crumpled to the ground, his betrayal ending in the dust. Carvalho, seeing his last traitor fall, let out a roar of rage and lunged at Damien. Damien, seeing his opening, met him head-on. They crashed to the stone floor, a tangle of limbs. Carvalho's gun was between them, a single shot, loud, final. Silence fell in the cathedral. Elena stared, her body frozen, the laptop still held high. Damien rose, slowly, from on top of Carvalho. His chest was heaving. He looked at Carvalho, who lay still, his eyes wide and empty, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Then, Damien looked up. He looked past the dead, past his men, past the broken glass. His eyes found Elena, standing in the doorway, shaking, victorious, framed in the light. The wail of police sirens, drawn by the live news feed, filled the air. It was over. The aftermath was a storm. The live-streamed footage was undeniable. The Carvalho Empire, with its leader dead and its corruption exposed, collapsed in on itself in less than 24 hours. The Moretti family, reeling from Sal's betrayal, began the hard, quiet work of cleaning its own house. Vince handled the internal sanitation. Sal's name was erased, his existence a lesson in loyalty. Damien, cleared of all charges in what was obviously self-defense, was free. Elena was at the first safe house, the glass box in the sky. She was on the terrace, in the small, manicured garden, sitting on the grass. Her boot was off, her foot resting on the cool earth. The adrenaline that had held her together for weeks, the fear, the planning, the rage, the fight for survival, was gone. And in its place, a crushing, profound exhaustion. She was safe. Her mother, recovering at the clinic, was safe. Damien was safe. The war was over. She put her head in her hands and, for the first time, cried for no reason other than that she could. The stress of her entire life, from the first hospital bill to the final gunshot, poured out of her in silent, heaving sobs. She didn't hear him approach. His footsteps were silent on the grass. Damien stopped a few feet away, watching her. He was clean, his arm in a fresh sling. He was no longer a general at war. He was just a man, his face stripped of all its hardness. He knelt beside her, not touching, just being there. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red. He smiled, a small, sad, infinitely tender smile. He reached out with his good hand, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "You were never just the poor girl," he whispered, his voice thick. "You're the reason I still believe in life." She leaned her head against his good shoulder, her sobs subsiding into a deep, shuddering peace. They sat there together, silent, as the sun set over Crescent Bay. The city that was, finally, theirs. A week later, the penthouse felt like a home. The cold, sterile edges had been softened. There were flowers in a vase. There were Elena's books on the shelf. Damien found her on the terrace, staring at the glittering lights. "Elena." She turned. He looked nervous. His arm was out of the sling, his suit immaculate, but his hands were clenched at his sides. "This," he said, walking toward her, his voice quiet. He gently took her left hand. This was a lie, a beautiful, necessary lie. It was a shield, a tactic, a brand. Elena's heart stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face. "When you don't need me anymore." He slipped the black opal ring from her finger. She stared at her bare hand, a cold, hollow feeling opening in her chest. "I'm done with lies, Elena," he said. "I'm done with tactics, and I'm done with protection." He took a breath, and then, to her utter shock, Damien Moretti got down on one knee. "I don't need a queen for my empire," he said, his voice raw, shaking. "I need you, just you. I love you. I love the terrified waitress who spilled wine on my man, and I love the warrior who walked into a gunfight to save my life. They are the same woman, and I cannot and will not live without her." He held up the ring, the same black opal, glowing in the starlight. "This ring does hold a secret," he said, his eyes locked on hers, shining with the same unshed tears she felt in her own. "The secret is that my mother gave it to me when I was 10. She told me to give it to the woman who was stronger than I was. I never understood what she meant. Until you..." He took her bare hand. "Elena Russo. Will you marry me? For real this time. No lies. No secrets. Just you and me." Elena was crying, but the tears were not of fear, or stress, or relief. They were tears of a profound, blinding joy. She didn't say yes. She sank to her knees in front of him, her hands framing his face. She pulled him to her and kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion or survival. It was a kiss of promise. It was the first day of her life. "Yes," she whispered against his lips, 1,000 times. "Yes." He smiled, His entire face illuminated and slid the ring back onto her finger. It was no longer a shackle. It was an anchor. Thank you for listening to this story. We hope it captured your heart. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. We value your thoughts, so please share them with us in English.